Well, hello everyone. This is Fadi, and I want to welcome you back to a continuation of this amazing series that we have titled Christ of the Psalms. And really, the technical name, if you do a search, usually it is Christ in the Psalter or Christ of the Psalter. That's the technical name for the book of Psalms. But we wanted just to make sure that people can find it and benefit from it. When I say we, I'm talking about myself and our dear brother Anthony Rogers, who is joining us right now virtually into our studios. Anthony, thank you so much as always for joining us, brother, and being here.
Yeah, it's great to be back with you. So last time I concluded by arguing that this five-fold book has a definite structure to it. And just like it has a conclusion at the end of each book and at the end of the entire collection of books, it also has a preface. And that preface, I argued, includes Psalm 1 and Psalm 2. What I want to do is give further evidence of that. And if you weren't persuaded last time, this should push you well over the top. Okay, notice in Psalm 1 how it begins. It begins by talking about the blessed man. The phrase is singular. It's not plural. And this is to the shame of those translators that render it in the plural and obscure it. Some will actually say, how blessed are people who do not walk in the counsel. That's not accurate to the Hebrew, and it's certainly not bringing out the sense of it. Notice how consistent the psalm is in referring to this as an individual. How blessed is the man who does not walk in the counsel of the wicked. Okay. The man is set in contrast to a plurality of wicked people. Okay, the wicked is plural in Hebrew. So the man is being contrasted with wicked people. Nor does this blessed man stand in the path of sinners. Again, in the Hebrew, it's plural. This time, at least, the English is clear. If the wicked isn't clear in English, it is in Hebrew, but here sinners is clear in both the Hebrew and in the English. And then furthermore, it says, nor sit in the seat of scoffers. So you have a blessed man who's being contrasted with wicked sinners and scoffers. It goes on to say of this blessed man, his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law he meditates day and night. He meditates. Note, in verse 3, it says, he will be like a tree firmly planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in its season, and its leaf does not wither. And in whatever he does, he prospers. You see how consistently and how repeatedly the psalmist emphasizes that this is a particular individual. He uses the singular throughout and repeatedly, and he sets this singular man in contrast to a plurality of wicked people. Now, what's interesting is in verses 1 through 3, you have this full description of this blessed man. But then in verse 4, you have this very brief reference to the wicked before getting to the following verses, which actually draw a conclusion. But verse 4 is all it says about the wicked in contrast to the blessed man in terms of the main body of the psalm before the conclusion. It says, the wicked are not so, but they're like chaff, which the wind blows away. Again, wicked is plural, but you'll notice it here calls them like chaff, which that's something that's light and worthless. It's blown away. And that's, I think, why the psalmist is so brief here in his reference to the wicked. He's just sort of dismissing them. In contrast to the righteous man who deserves much attention, the wicked, being like chaff, they get a mere line. But then the psalmist concludes this way, therefore the wicked will not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the assembly of the righteous. Interestingly, the Targum recognizes that this is eschatological in nature. In other words, it's talking about that final day when God will judge the world. It says, therefore the wicked will not be acquitted in the great day, nor sinners in the band of the righteous. This is significant.
Can you explain the Targum for people, just they know what we mean by that?
Yeah, so the Targums were ancient Jewish paraphrases of the Old Testament. So the Jews came to speak Aramaic because of their exile. And when they returned, it was common to read the Old Testament scriptures in their original Hebrew, but then for the benefit of the hearer, to translate along with an interpretation the Hebrew into Aramaic. And so these are what we know as the Targums. They're interpretations, and they're often paraphrastic. They paraphrase things. They expand the idea that's encapsulated in the Hebrew. And so they're significant in that they reflect what was understood by Jews in ancient times.
Exactly.
Yeah. So they're not thinking of Psalm 1 merely as having some figure of the past in view. They're looking to the future. This is eschatological in their mind. That'll have great significance when we move on. But notice a couple of things really quickly about this figure. It says in verse 2, in the Torah of the Lord is his delight. Okay. The way it's normally ordered in our Bibles obscures the significance of what this is actually saying about this blessed man. In our translations, the syntax is his delight is in the Torah of the Lord, and in his Torah he meditates day and night. But here's the Hebrew syntax. In the Torah of the Lord is his delight. Now, here's the reason why this is significant. His, in his delight, the his here, the pronoun, is quite obviously the blessed man, right? He's the one who's being described as delighting in the Torah of the Lord. Okay, so the antecedent contextually of his is the blessed man. He's delighting in the Torah. But notice it goes on and says, in his Torah, he meditates day and night. What this is doing is it's now referring to the Torah not only as the Torah of the Lord, but as the Torah of the blessed man.
That's right.
Right? The Torah that is his delight is here being called his Torah. Now, this is not grammatically challengeable, right? This is not a idiosyncrasy that I'm, alone in. It's not something that I've made up. You can find competent Jewish authorities that will make exactly this point. For example, Rashi, in his commentary on the Psalm, says that's exactly what this Psalm is saying. It's saying that the Torah is the blessed man's Torah. Now, Rashi has to do a good bit of juggling or jumping through hoops or gymnastics or acting like a cat on hot textural bricks to try and get around this, right? Or like a gecko on the hot desert sands that, can't keep its feet on the ground. Rashi has to try by hook or by crook to get around this, but nevertheless, he acknowledges that grammatically, that's exactly what this is saying. So this suggests that this blessed man is something far more than just a human being. If the Torah of the Lord is being called his Torah, then it suggests a relationship between this figure and the Lord that goes well beyond what is otherwise true of ordinary men. But notice another thing about this blessed man. In verse 3, it says, he'll be like a tree firmly planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in its season, and its leaf does not wither. In whatever he does, he prospers. Notice it speaks of this person being like a tree. There are numerous Psalms that refer back to this. In Psalm 52, it says, as for me, I'm like a green olive tree in the house of God. I trust in the loving kindness of God forever and ever. I will give thanks forever because you have done it, and I will wait on your name, for it's good in the presence of your godly ones. Now, who is this figure in Psalm 52 who speaks of himself being like a green olive tree in the house of God? Notice, by the way, that it here speaks of his location being the house of God. Okay, back in Psalm 1, it talks about him being like a tree planted by streams of water. And if you think back to Genesis 3, it's drawing on the imagery of Eden, which was like a temple context, right? God is there dwelling with his people. That's the reality of the temple, right? When God banishes them from the garden, they're being banished from his presence. When he institutes the temple or tabernacle system, he's reestablishing his dwelling among them. And so when this one speaks of himself as dwelling in, or like a tree in a garden paradise, he's speaking of himself dwelling in God's dwelling place. Well, here it's made more explicit. It says he's dwelling as an olive tree in the house of God. But notice this is also something stated in Psalm 92. In Psalm 92, note what it says here. You have exalted my horn like that of the wild ox. I have been anointed with fresh oil. So the figure here is one who is anointed, quite
A king,
evidently.
a chosen one. Yeah.
Yeah, the Messiah, right? Well, notice how this goes on to speak of this anointed one. In verse 12, it says, the righteous man will flourish like the palm tree. He will grow like a cedar in Lebanon. So what I'm pointing out here is that Psalm 1, which begins the Psalter, is really properly viewed about an individual, a particular individual who is eminently blessed, who can speak of the Torah as his Torah and can speak of his abode, his proper abode being in the very dwelling place of God. Now, it goes on to say that this one will prosper. This is stated throughout the prophetic books as something that will be true of the Messiah, that he will prosper. Jeremiah 23, Isaiah 53, behold, my servant will prosper, right? So the Messiah is a fitting candidate for the particular individual that's in view in Psalm 1. Now, I argued in previous episodes that Psalm 1 and 2 are really to be viewed together. There's an interplay between these two Psalms.
Right.
These in turn function as the preface to the Psalter, which means they're setting the tone, they're setting the agenda, they're telling you how you should be reading the rest of the book. But notice what happens in Psalm 2. It plays off of Psalm 1. In Psalm 2, it doesn't refer to these people as wicked, but it's quite obvious that they are. They're in an uproar. They're devising a vain thing, right? It uses even the same word found in Psalm 1. The blessed man meditates on the law of God, but these people are meditating or devising a vain thing. It's the same Hebrew word. So the blessed man meditates on God's law. These wicked people are meditating on how they can undo this one's reign over them. Okay, it goes on to say, he who sits in the heavens laughs. Remember, Psalm 1 says that the blessed man does not sit in the seat of scoffers. But here it speaks of one who sits in the heavens and he's scoffing at the wicked. Again, you should see the interplay between the two Psalms. They're lexically tied together. There's an interplay that is quite conspicuous in the Hebrew, if not also in the English.
From a literary standpoint, it seems like there is a connection. There is a tie.
Absolutely. Yes. And so verse 6 goes on to say, as for me, I have installed my king upon Zion, my holy mountain. Now, the word for installed here is not the same exact Hebrew term as when it speaks of being the tree being established by streams of water, but conceptually it's the same idea, right? This tree is being established or planted by the streams of water, which I've said is a picture of the garden paradise or the dwelling of the Lord with his people. Here it speaks of the king being installed, a similar idea conceptually. But notice it talks about him being installed on my holy mountain. Eden was a garden paradise. It's pictured as a mountain. Think of Isaiah 14, Ezekiel 28, where it's described as a mountain paradise with streams of water coming down and so forth. So again, you've got this very clear tie-in, in fact, not only between Psalm 2 and Psalm 1, but between these two Psalms and other Psalms that come later in the Psalter and things that come earlier in the Bible. Just a couple more points here in Psalm 2 before closing out this episode. Notice that in verse 12, it says, kiss the Son. I love that expression, nashkubar, kiss the Son. It means to reverence him, to do homage to him, to submit to him, that he not become angry and you perish in the way. Remember, at the end of Psalm 1, it says that the wicked will perish. Again, it's picking up a term from Psalm 1 and is using it in Psalm 2. In Psalm 1, it also says that the wicked will, the way of the wicked will perish. Notice here, it also mentions the way, right? If they don't kiss the Son, they will perish in the way. Well, as I mentioned in a previous broadcast, Psalm 2 ends in the same way that Psalm 1 begins. Psalm 1 begins by saying the man is blessed, right? How blessed is the man who does not walk, stand, or sit in the company of the wicked. Here, all who take refuge in him, who's the him? It's the anointed one, the Son, the King of Psalm 2. Amen. And so this is the introduction to the Psalter. And if this is the introduction to the Psalter, it's telling us how we're supposed to read the book.
Absolutely. And I will hold my comments until the beginning of the next one because this was meaty. And I want people to at least meditate on what they have seen. It's amazing. There's a lot of words that even resonate with my Arabic language, like, the fact that the sun can basically cause your demise, if you wish, or the Arabic word for that, yubidukum, which is exactly, sounds almost similar to the Hebrew word anyway. But all that to say is that you can see now, folks, there is a mention of the Messiah, the chosen one, the anointed one, the Son. There are kings versus a king, and the rise of a new king, and the list can go on and on and on. Thanks, brother, as always. Appreciate you, appreciate this depth of study, and I'm sure a lot of people will be blessed by it. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Until next episode, have a blessed day.